Jake Thorne was no stranger to the unforgiving vacuum of space. As an experienced explorer, he had charted countless unknown territories, mapping the far reaches of the galaxy for future missions. He was known for his resourcefulness and calm under pressure qualities that had saved his life more times than he could count, but nothing could have prepared him for what awaited him on this mission. The journey had been smooth at first, the vast expanse of space stretching out before him like an endless ocean of stars. His ship, the Orion's Light, was a reliable vessel, equipped with the latest in navigation and survival technology. Jake had felt a sense of excitement as he entered uncharted territory, his instruments buzzing with the potential for new discoveries. The galaxy was full of mysteries, and Jake had a knack for finding them. But as he ventured deeper into the unknown, something went wrong. A sudden, inexplicable surge of energy rocked the ship, causing the lights on the control panel to flicker ominously. Jake's fingers flew across the controls, attempting to stabilize the ship, but the systems began to fail one by one. The ship shuddered violently as alarms blared, warning him of imminent danger. "Come on, Orion, stay with me," Jake muttered through gritted teeth as he fought to regain control. But it was no use. The ship was caught in a gravitational pull stronger than anything he had ever encountered, dragging him towards a nearby planet. The readings were erratic, the sensors unable to make sense of the planet's atmosphere or terrain. Jake's heart pounded as he realized he had no choice but to initiate an emergency landing. His hands moved with practiced precision as he activated the landing sequence, bracing himself for impact. The Orion's Light plunged through the planet's atmosphere, the friction heating the hull to dangerous levels. The ship shook violently as it broke through the clouds, and for a brief moment Jake caught a glimpse of the planet's surface, dark, rugged, and foreboding. The landing was rough. The ship slammed into the ground with a force that knocked the wind out of Jake's lungs. The sound of metal grinding against rock filled the cockpit as the ship skidded across the barren landscape, finally coming to a jarring halt against a jagged outcrop. The impact threw Jake forward in his seat, the harness digging into his shoulders. For a few moments all he could hear was the sound of his own breathing, heavy and ragged, as he tried to process what had just happened. Silence followed. The alarms had stopped, leaving only the faint hum of the ship's life support systems, still functional despite the damage. Jake gingerly unfastened his harness and stood, his muscles protesting after the ordeal. The cockpit was dimly lit, the main power offline, but the emergency lights cast an eerie glow over the controls. Jake surveyed the damage. The ship's systems were in bad shape, the navigation controls unresponsive, and the communication array completely fried. He was stranded, but Jake was not one to panic. He took a deep breath, pushing down the rising tide of frustration and fear. First things first, he needed to assess his surroundings and figure out where he had landed. He grabbed his gear, including a portable scanner and a sidearm standard issue for any explorer, just in case. The ship's hatch groaned as he forced it open, and Jake stepped out into the unknown. The landscape that greeted him was as desolate as it was mysterious. The sky was a deep, bruised shade of purple, with swirling clouds that hinted at the presence of some strange atmospheric disturbance. The ground beneath his feet was rocky and uneven, with patches of dry, cracked earth interspersed with jagged outcroppings of stone. A biting wind whipped through the air, carrying with it a faint, metallic scent that Jake couldn't quite place. In the distance, he could see towering structures, ruins of what must have been an impressive civilization, now crumbling and forgotten. They rose like skeletal remains against the horizon, their once majestic forms now broken and decayed. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. This place was ancient, abandoned for reasons he could only guess at. He activated his scanner, sweeping it across the landscape. The readings were strange. There was a faint but consistent energy signature coming from the ruins, something that shouldn't have been possible on a planet that appeared devoid of life. The scanner also detected remnants of advanced technology, buried beneath layers of dust and debris. Intrigued, Jake decided to investigate. If there was any chance of finding something useful, perhaps even a way to repair his ship, he had to take it. The journey to the ruins was slow and cautious. The terrain was treacherous, with hidden crevices and loose rocks that could easily send him tumbling if he wasn't careful. As he approached the ruins, Jake's unease grew. The structures were massive, towering over him like silent sentinels. Their surfaces were covered in strange symbols and carvings, worn smooth by the passage of time. He couldn't decipher the meaning behind them, but there was an undeniable sense of purpose in their design. These weren't just buildings, they were something more, something sacred. Jake stepped into what appeared to be a grand hall, its roof partially collapsed but still standing. The air inside was cool and still, and the faint glow of the setting sun filtered through the cracks in the walls, casting long shadows across the floor. As he moved deeper into the hall, he noticed something odd, a faint shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from the ground, but there was no heat source. Curiosity piqued, Jake moved closer, but as he did, the shimmer intensified. Before he could react, a force slammed into him, knocking him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. Dazed, he looked up to see a figure standing over him, tall, slender, and distinctly alien. The figure was a woman, but unlike any woman Jake had ever seen. Her skin was a soft, iridescent blue, and her eyes glowed with an inner light, shifting colors like the surface of a calm ocean. Her hair, silver and flowing, seemed to move with a life of its own, catching the faintest glimmers of light. She wore a form-fitting garment that appeared to be made of the same shimmering material as her hair, intricate patterns running along its surface. Jake's hand instinctively moved towards his sidearm, but the woman moved faster, a flick of her wrist sending the weapon skidding across the floor. She spoke, her voice melodic yet firm, in a language Jake didn't understand. The words flowed over him like a stream, incomprehensible but not hostile. Her posture was tense, her eyes narrowed as she regarded him with a mix of curiosity and caution. Jake raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, his heart pounding. "I don't mean any harm," he said, unsure if she could even understand him. "I'm just an explorer. My ship crashed, and I'm stranded here." The woman's expression softened slightly. Though she didn't lower her guard, she studied him for a long moment, then spoke again, this time slower, as if searching for the right words. "You are not from this world," she said, her accent thick but her meaning clear. Jake nodded, relieved that they could at least communicate. "That's right. I'm from a planet called Earth. I didn't mean to intrude." The woman tilted her head, as if processing this information. Her gaze flickered towards the doorway, where the last rays of sunlight were fading, then back to Jake. Finally she sighed and extended a hand towards him. "Come, it is not safe to stay here after dark." Jake hesitated for a brief moment before accepting her hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong, and as she helped him to his feet, he felt a strange warmth radiating from her touch. There was a brief moment of connection, a silent understanding that despite their differences, they were both stranded on this forsaken world, and perhaps they needed each other to survive. She led him through a maze of corridors and tunnels, the architecture growing more intricate and alien the deeper they went. The walls were adorned with more of the strange symbols, some of which emitted a faint glow. Jake's mind raced with questions, but he kept silent, sensing that now was not the time to ask. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a large chamber, hidden deep within the ruins. The room was filled with the remnants of ancient technology, consoles and devices that hummed softly with power, their purpose a mystery to Jake. In the center of the chamber was a pool of shimmering liquid, its surface perfectly still, reflecting the soft glow of the surrounding lights. The woman gestured for Jake to sit, and he complied, lowering himself onto a smooth stone bench. She took a seat across from him, her expression unreadable. "I am Lyra," she said finally, breaking the silence. "I was stranded here many years ago, the last of my kind on this world." Jake nodded, absorbing this information. "Jake," he replied, "Jake Thorne. I guess that makes two of us stranded now." Lyra's gaze softened, a hint of sadness flickering in her eyes. "This planet, it was once a thriving world, home to my people, the Alara. We were an advanced civilization, masters of technology and the forces of nature. But we grew too ambitious, and our hubris led to our downfall." Jake leaned forward, intrigued. "What happened?" Lyra hesitated, as if the memories were painful. "We attempted to harness a power far beyond our control, a source of energy that could have sustained us for millennia. But we were not prepared for the consequences. The energy spiraled out of control, devastating the planet. Most of my people perished, and those who survived, they left, seeking refuge elsewhere in the galaxy. I remained behind to guard what was left." Jake felt a pang of empathy. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like for her, stranded alone on a dying world. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Lyra met his gaze, her expression resolute. It was our own doing. But now, perhaps you and I can help each other. This world is dangerous, especially for someone unfamiliar with its ways. If you are to survive, you will need my knowledge. Jake nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. And in return, I can help you. Together we might find a way off this planet, or at least a way to make it livable again. A small smile tugged at the corners of Lyra's lips. Perhaps. But first, you must rest. The night here is long and unforgiving. Jake agreed, feeling the weight of exhaustion settling over him. Lyra led him to a small alcove, where a makeshift bed had been prepared. As he lay down, the events of the day swirling in his mind, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hope. He was stranded on a forgotten world, surrounded by dangers he couldn't yet comprehend, but he wasn't alone. And in the vast, empty expanse of the galaxy, that counted for something. As sleep began to overtake him, Jake's thoughts drifted to Lyra. She was an enigma, a survivor with a strength that belied her delicate appearance. Together, they would face the challenges of this world, and maybe, just maybe, they would find a way to bring light back to the ruins of a lost civilization. And as the darkness of night settled over the planet, Jake dreamed of new beginnings, unaware of the dangers and discoveries that awaited them in the days to come. Jake awoke to the soft glow of light filtering through the cracks in the stone ceiling above. For a moment he forgot where he was, his mind still caught in the liminal space between sleep and wakefulness. The familiar hum of his ship's engines was absent, replaced by the distant rustle of wind through the ruins and the low, almost musical hum of the ancient technology that permeated the air. Reality slowly settled back in, bringing with it the weight of his predicament stranded on a desolate planet, far from home, with only a mysterious alien woman as his companion. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His body ached from the crash and the unfamiliar bed, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The day before had been a whirlwind of unexpected events, and as disorienting as it all was, Jake knew that survival would depend on understanding the world he had landed on. Lyra was already awake, seated on a stone ledge near the chamber's entrance. She was staring at the pool of shimmering liquid in the center of the room, her expression distant, as if lost in memories. The sight of her in the soft morning light, with her silver hair cascading down her back and her iridescent skin catching the light, made her seem almost otherworldly, a being from a time long forgotten. Jake cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Lyra turned her head, her eyes meeting his. For a brief moment, they simply looked at each other, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Despite the strangeness of their situation, they were allies now, bound by circumstance and necessity. "Morning," Jake said, stretching his arms above his head. "How long have you been up?" Lyra smiled faintly, the corners of her lips barely lifting. "Time here is different. The cycles of day and night are not as consistent as you may be used to. But I have been awake for some time, contemplating our next move." Jake nodded, pulling on his boots. "I've been thinking about that too. We need to find more resources if I'm going to repair my ship. And it seems like the best place to start is these ruins. There's something here, some kind of energy source, and I have a feeling it might be connected to your people's downfall." Lyra's expression grew serious, and she stood, smoothing her hands over her garment. "You are correct. The energy you sense is what remains of the power my people once sought to control. It is buried deep within this planet, still active after all this time. But it is unstable, dangerous. If we are to tap into it, we must be careful." Jake walked over to her, his mind buzzing with questions. "You mentioned that your people tried to harness this energy. What exactly happened? How did it all go so wrong?" Lyra sighed, her gaze drifting to the ancient symbols etched into the walls. "The Alara were a proud race. Our civilization was built on the foundation of knowledge and mastery over the natural world. We were explorers, much like yourself, constantly seeking to expand our understanding of the universe. But with knowledge comes hubris." She began to walk, motioning for Jake to follow her deeper into the ruins. "We discovered an energy source unlike anything we had ever encountered, a force that seemed to be the very essence of the planet itself. It was a power that could have sustained our civilization for millennia, solving all our energy needs and elevating us to heights we could only dream of. But we were blind to the dangers." As they walked, the corridor they were in began to widen, the walls becoming more intricately decorated with symbols and carvings. The air grew cooler, and the soft hum of the technology around them became more pronounced. "We built machines to extract and control this energy," Lyra continued, her voice tinged with regret. "At first it worked. Our cities thrived, our technology advanced, and we believed we had achieved the impossible. But then, something changed. The energy became volatile, unpredictable. We had tapped into something far greater than we could comprehend, and in our arrogance we lost control." Jake listened intently, trying to imagine the scene. Lyra was describing a once great civilization brought to its knees by its own ambition. He could see the parallels with humanity's own history, the countless times his own species had reached too far, only to be humbled by the consequences. Lyra stopped in front of a large stone door, its surface engraved with symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. She placed her hand on the door, and after a moment, it began to slide open with a low rumble, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The room was unlike anything Jake had seen before. The walls were lined with consoles and devices, all of them ancient yet still functional, their surfaces covered in dust but humming with latent power. In the center of the room was a massive cylindrical structure, pulsating with a soft blue light. It was connected to the consoles by a web of cables and conduits, all converging on the glowing core at its heart. "This is the heart of the ruin," Lyra said, her voice echoing softly in the cavernous space. "The central nexus where the energy was once harnessed. It was here that the final disaster occurred, when the energy became too much to contain. The explosion that followed destroyed much of our civilization and left this planet in the state you see now." Jake approached the central nexus, his eyes wide with awe. The energy pulsing within it was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was both mesmerizing and terrifying, a reminder of the sheer power that had once flowed through this place. "Is it still dangerous?" he asked, glancing back at Lyra. She nodded. "Yes, but it is contained for now. The safeguards we put in place after the disaster still hold, but they are weakening. If the containment fails completely, the consequences could be catastrophic." Jake frowned, his mind racing with possibilities. "Is there any way to stabilize it? To control it again, even temporarily?" Lyra hesitated, her gaze fixed on the nexus. "There may be, but it would require reactivating the old systems that have lain dormant for centuries. It would be a delicate process, and one mistake could trigger another disaster." Jake weighed the risks. They were already in a precarious situation, and the thought of playing with forces they barely understood was daunting. But the energy in the nexus represented more than just a danger, it was also an opportunity. If they could find a way to harness it safely, it could provide the power needed to repair his ship, and perhaps even stabilize the planet. "We don't have much of a choice," Jake said finally. "If we leave it alone, it could still fail on its own, and who knows what kind of damage that would do. But if we can stabilize it, it might just give us the edge we need." Lyra nodded, though her expression remained tense. "Very well. But we must proceed with caution. The first step is to re-establish the connections between the nexus and the control systems. I can guide you through the process, but you will need to be precise in your actions." Jake awoke to the soft glow of light filtering through the cracks in the stone ceiling above. For a moment he forgot where he was, his mind still caught in the liminal space between sleep and wakefulness. The familiar hum of his ship's engines was absent, replaced by the distant rustle of wind through the ruins and the low, almost musical hum of the ancient technology that permeated the air. Reality slowly settled back in, bringing with it the weight of his predicament, stranded on a desolate planet, far from home, with only a mysterious alien woman as his companion. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His body ached from the crash and the unfamiliar bed, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The day before had been a whirlwind of unexpected events, and as disorienting as it all was, Jake knew that survival would depend on understanding the world he had landed on. Lyra was already awake, seated on a stone ledge near the chamber's entrance. She was staring at the pool of shimmering liquid in the center of the room, her expression distant, as if lost in memories. The sight of her in the soft morning light, with her silver hair cascading down her back and her iridescent skin catching the light, made her seem almost otherworldly, a being from a time long forgotten. Jake cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Lyra turned her head, her eyes meeting his. For a brief moment, they simply looked at each other, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Despite the strangeness of their situation, they were allies now, bound by circumstance and necessity. "Morning," Jake said, stretching his arms above his head. "How long have you been up?" Lyra smiled faintly, the corners of her lips barely lifting. "Time here is different. The cycles of day and night are not as consistent as you may be used to, but I have been awake for some time, contemplating our next move." Jake nodded, pulling on his boots. "I've been thinking about that too. We need to find more resources if I'm going to repair my ship. And it seems like the best place to start is these ruins. There's something here, some kind of energy source, and I have a feeling it might be connected to your people's downfall." Lyra's expression grew serious, and she stood, smoothing her hands over her garment. "You are correct. The energy you sense is what remains of the power my people once sought to control. It is buried deep within this planet, still active after all this time. But it is unstable, dangerous. If we are to tap into it, we must be careful." Jake walked over to her, his mind buzzing with questions. "You mentioned that your people tried to harness this energy. What exactly happened? How did it all go so wrong?" Lyra sighed, her gaze drifting to the ancient symbols etched into the walls. "The Alara were a proud race. Our civilization was built on the foundation of knowledge and mastery over the natural world. We were explorers, much like yourself, constantly seeking to expand our understanding of the universe. But with knowledge comes hubris." She began to walk, motioning for Jake to follow her deeper into the ruins. "We discovered an energy source unlike anything we had ever encountered, a force that seemed to be the very essence of the planet itself. It was a power that could have sustained our civilization for millennia, solving all our energy needs and elevating us to heights we could only dream of. But we were blind to the dangers." As they walked, the corridor they were in began to widen, the walls becoming more intricately decorated with symbols and carvings. The air grew cooler, and the soft hum of the technology around them became more pronounced. "We built machines to extract and control this energy," Lyra continued, her voice tinged with regret. "At first it worked. Our cities thrived, our technology advanced, and we believed we had achieved the impossible. But then, something changed. The energy became volatile, unpredictable. We had tapped into something far greater than we could comprehend, and in our arrogance we lost control." Jake listened intently, trying to imagine the scene Lyra was describing, a once great civilization brought to its knees by its own ambition. He could see the parallels with humanity's own history, the countless times his own species had reached too far, only to be humbled by the consequences. Lyra stopped in front of a large stone door, its surface engraved with symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. She placed her hand on the door, and after a moment, it began to slide open with a low rumble, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The room was unlike anything Jake had seen before. The walls were lined with consoles and devices, all of them ancient yet still functional, their surfaces covered in dust but humming with latent power. In the center of the room was a massive cylindrical structure, pulsating with a soft blue light. It was connected to the consoles by a web of cables and conduits, all converging on the glowing core at its heart. "This is the heart of the ruin," Lyra said, her voice echoing softly in the cavernous space. "The central nexus where the energy was once harnessed. It was here that the final disaster occurred, when the energy became too much to contain. The explosion that followed destroyed much of our civilization and left this planet in the state you see now." Jake approached the central nexus, his eyes wide with awe. The energy pulsing within it was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was both mesmerizing and terrifying, a reminder of the sheer power that had once flowed through this place. "Is it still dangerous?" he asked, glancing back at Lyra. She nodded. "Yes, but it is contained for now. The safeguards we put in place after the disaster still hold, but they are weakening. If the containment fails completely, the consequences could be catastrophic." Jake frowned, his mind racing with possibilities. "Is there any way to stabilize it? To control it again, even temporarily?" Lyra hesitated, her gaze fixed on the nexus. "There may be, but it would require reactivating the old systems that have lain dormant for centuries. It would be a delicate process, and one mistake could trigger another disaster." Jake weighed the risks. They were already in a precarious situation, and the thought of playing with forces they barely understood was daunting. But the energy in the nexus represented more than just a danger, it was also an opportunity. If they could find a way to harness it safely, it could provide the power needed to repair his ship and perhaps even stabilize the planet. "We don't have much of a choice," Jake said finally. "If we leave it alone, it could still fail on its own, and who knows what kind of damage that would do. But if we can stabilize it, it might just give us the edge we need." Lyra nodded, though her expression remained tense. "Very well. But we must proceed with caution. The first step is to re-establish the connections between the Nexus and the control systems. I can guide you through the process, but you will need to be precise in your actions." Jake moved to one of the consoles, wiping away the layer of dust that had settled over the controls. The interface was unfamiliar, filled with symbols and characters he couldn't decipher. Lyra joined him, her fingers dancing across the console as she activated a series of commands. The symbols on the screen shifted, rearranging themselves into a more recognizable pattern. "Follow my instructions carefully," Lyra said, her voice calm but firm. "We need to reactivate the energy conduits one at a time. Start with this one here." Jake followed her lead, carefully pressing the indicated controls. The console responded with a soft chime, and one of the conduits connected to the Nexus began to glow brighter, the energy within it stabilizing. "Good," Lyra said. "Now the next one." They worked together in silence, reactivating the conduits one by one. With each successful connection, the room seemed to come alive, the ancient machinery humming with renewed power. Jake could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the task they were undertaking. One wrong move could undo all their progress, but he trusted Lyra's guidance. Finally, they reached the last conduit. As Jake pressed the final control, the entire chamber thrummed with energy, the blue light in the Nexus intensifying as the containment fields realigned and stabilized. The consoles around them flickered to life, displaying streams of data in the Alara language. "It's working," Lyra said, her voice filled with a mix of relief and wonder. "The Nexus is stabilizing, at least for now. The energy is contained, and we have control over the systems again." Jake stepped back, wiping the sweat from his brow. That was intense. "But it looks like we did it." Lyra nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Yes, we did. With the Nexus stabilized, we have access to the planet's remaining power reserves. This should give us what we need to repair your ship, and perhaps more." Jake's heart lifted at the prospect. "That's great news. But what about the long term? Is this a permanent fix, or just a temporary solution?" Lyra's smile faded slightly. "It is only temporary. The containment fields are still fragile, and the energy is still unstable. We have bought ourselves some time, but eventually the system will fail again, unless we find a more permanent solution." Jake frowned, considering their options. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, we should focus on repairing the ship and gathering whatever resources we can from these ruins." Lyra agreed, and they spent the next few hours exploring the chamber. They discovered several pieces of advanced technology that could be salvaged, including a power cell that Jake believed could be adapted to replace the damaged core in his ship's engine. There were also storage modules filled with raw materials, metals, polymers, and other resources that could prove invaluable. As they worked, Jake couldn't help but feel a growing sense of camaraderie with Lyra. Despite the alien nature of her appearance and the differences in their backgrounds, she was a kindred spirit and explorer, a survivor, and someone who had faced unimaginable loss. He admired her resilience, her ability to endure despite everything she had been through. When they finally returned to the surface, the sky had darkened, the sun dipping below the horizon and casting long shadows across the ruins. The wind had picked up, howling through the broken structures like the wail of a ghost. But the sight of the repaired conduits glowing faintly in the distance gave Jake a sense of hope. They had accomplished something significant, something that might just give them a fighting chance. As they made their way back to their makeshift camp, Jake's thoughts turned to the future. There was still so much they didn't know about the planet and the energy it harbored, and the dangers they faced were far from over. But they had taken the first step towards understanding and perhaps towards reclaiming the world that had once been lost. Lyra walked beside him in silence, her expression thoughtful. Jake wondered what was going through her mind. Was she thinking of her people, of the life she had once known, or was she focused on the present, on the fragile alliance they had formed? When they reached the camp, Jake set down the materials they had gathered and turned to Lyra. "We made a lot of progress today," he said, trying to sound optimistic. "But there's still a long way to go." Lyra met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the ruins behind them. "Yes, there is. But we are not alone in this, Jake. As long as we work together, we have a chance." Jake nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him at her words. "You're right, we'll figure this out, one step at a time." They shared a quiet meal, the weight of the day's events settling over them like a heavy blanket. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of the mysteries this planet held. There were still so many questions unanswered about the Alara, about the energy, and about what the future held for both of them. As night fell and they prepared to rest, Jake found himself lying awake, staring up at the dark ceiling of their shelter. His mind raced with thoughts of the challenges ahead, but also with a strange sense of anticipation. He had come to this planet expecting to chart unknown territories, and instead he had stumbled upon something far more profound, a world with a history and secrets that defied comprehension. And at the heart of it all was Lyra, a woman who had become more than just a companion in his journey. There was a connection between them, something deeper than just survival. Jake wasn't sure where it would lead, but he knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. With that thought in mind, Jake finally allowed himself to drift off to sleep, the sound of the wind outside lulling him into a deep, dreamless slumber. But in the darkness, the planet's core continued to pulse, its secrets still hidden, waiting to be uncovered. Jake awoke to the sound of distant thunder rumbling across the barren landscape. His eyes snapped open, and for a moment he was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings reminding him that he was far from the comforts of home. The makeshift bed he had slept on was a far cry from the cushioned bunk aboard his ship, and the rough stone walls of the chamber offered little solace. The reality of his situation settled over him like a heavy cloak. He was stranded on a desolate planet, with no clear way back to Earth. But as his mind cleared, the events of the previous day came rushing back. The ancient ruins, the energy nexus they had managed to stabilize, and the alien woman who had become his unlikely ally. All of it was real, and all of it was now his responsibility. He glanced over to where Lyra had been sleeping, but her bed was empty. The faint glow of the early morning light filtered through the cracks in the chamber's ceiling, casting long shadows across the floor. Jake pushed himself up, his muscles protesting after the previous day's exertions, and made his way to the entrance. Outside, the wind had picked up, whipping through the ruins with a mournful howl. Dark clouds loomed on the horizon, their edges tinged with an ominous green hue. The planet's atmosphere was a volatile one, prone to sudden shifts in weather that made survival all the more precarious. Lyra stood at the edge of a crumbling wall, her gaze fixed on the approaching storm. Her silver hair billowed in the wind, and her iridescent skin seemed to shimmer with a faint light, as if absorbing the energy in the air. She didn't turn as Jake approached, but he could sense the tension in her posture. "Looks like we've got a storm coming," Jake said, his voice raised to be heard over the wind. Lyra nodded, her eyes narrowing as she studied the sky. "This storm is different from the ones you've seen before. The energy we reactivated yesterday, it has an effect on the weather patterns here. The planet's atmosphere is sensitive to fluctuations in the energy field, and now that we've stabilized the nexus, it's reacting." Jake frowned, glancing up at the swirling clouds. "Reacting how? Should we be worried?" Lyra's expression was unreadable. "The storm will be intense, but it is not the storm itself that concerns me. The creatures that dwell in the deeper parts of this world, they are drawn to the energy, especially when it fluctuates. They may see this storm as an opportunity to emerge." Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. He had seen glimpses of the planet's wildlife, small, skittering creatures that had kept their distance, but he had no idea what larger predators might lurk in the shadows. The thought of facing unknown threats in the midst of a storm was not a comforting one. "Do you know what we're dealing with?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lyra finally turned to face him, her expression grave. "There are many dangers on this planet, but the ones we must be most cautious of are the Chiron. They are ancient beings, remnants of a time before even the Alara. When the energy fields fluctuate, they become more active, more aggressive. They will sense the changes we've made, and they may come to investigate." Jake's mind raced. The Chiron, even the name sounded ominous. What do they look like? How do we defend against them? Lyra's gaze hardened. "They are large, powerful creatures, capable of withstanding the harshest conditions. Their forms are malleable, shifting with the energy around them. They are almost impervious to conventional weapons. But they have a weakness: their reliance on the planet's energy. If we can disrupt their connection to the energy fields, we may be able to drive them away." Jake took a deep breath, his thoughts whirling. Okay, so we need to find a way to disrupt their connection. Can we use the technology in the ruins? Lyra nodded, already moving towards one of the nearby structures. Yes, but it won't be easy. The systems we reactivated yesterday can be modified to emit a counter-frequency that disrupts the energy field in a localized area, but the process is risky, and if we're not careful, we could destabilize the entire nexus. Jake followed her, determination settling over him like a second skin. We don't have much of a choice. If the Chiron are as dangerous as you say, we need to be prepared. They worked quickly, the approaching storm driving them to action. Inside the chamber where they had stabilized the nexus, Lyra began inputting commands into the consoles, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Jake watched as the symbols on the screen shifted and changed, the ancient technology responding to her touch. This will take some time, Lyra said, her voice calm but focused. The counter frequency needs to be carefully calibrated to avoid triggering another fluctuation in the energy field. In the meantime, we should prepare the defenses. Jake nodded, already thinking ahead. What kind of defenses do we have? Lyra hesitated, glancing around the chamber. There are automated defense systems built into the ruins, but they have not been active for centuries. I will attempt to reactivate them, but their effectiveness is uncertain. Jake wasn't sure how much longer they had before the storm hit, but he knew they couldn't afford to waste any time. Do what you can. I'll see if I can fortify the entrance. Leaving Lyra to her work, Jake made his way back to the surface. The wind had grown stronger, the clouds churning above like a living entity. The air crackled with energy, and Jake could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. It was as if the entire planet was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He began scavenging for materials, searching the ruins for anything that could be used to reinforce their shelter. The structures around him were crumbling, but some of the walls were still sturdy, built to withstand the harsh environment. Jake found a series of large flat stones and began stacking them around the entrance to their chamber, creating a makeshift barricade. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The wind carried strange sounds, whispers almost, just on the edge of hearing. Jake paused, glancing around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Still, the unease gnawed at him, a constant reminder that he was far from alone on this planet. By the time he finished, the storm was nearly upon them. The sky had darkened to a deep, bruised purple, and the first drops of rain began to fall, heavy and cold. The wind howled through the ruins, and the temperature dropped sharply, the air now filled with the scent of ozone. Jake retreated into the chamber, where Lyra was still working on the consoles. She glanced up as he entered, her expression unreadable. "The counter frequency is almost ready," she said, her voice barely audible over the rising wind. "But there's something you should know. This frequency, it may not just drive the Chiron away. It could also draw them closer, at least initially. They will sense the disruption and come to investigate." Jake swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. "So we're going to have to face them first, then drive them away." Lyra nodded. "Yes, but if we succeed, they will retreat, and the energy field will stabilize again. It's a risk, but it's our best option." Jake clenched his fists, feeling the adrenaline start to pump through his veins. "All right, let's do this." Lyra activated the final sequence, and the chamber was filled with a low, resonating hum. The energy nexus in the center of the room pulsed with light, the glow intensifying as the counter frequency began to take effect. The air vibrated with power, the sound growing louder until it was almost deafening. Outside, the storm unleashed its fury. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing through the ruins with ferocious intensity. Rain lashed against the stone walls, and lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the landscape in brief, blinding flashes. Jake and Lyra braced themselves, their senses on high alert. The hum of the counter frequency continued to build, reaching a crescendo that reverberated through their bones. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he waited, every muscle in his body tensed for the coming confrontation. And then, through the roar of the storm, he heard a deep, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very air itself. It was a sound that no creature from Earth could have made, a sound that spoke of ancient power and primal fury. Lyra's eyes widened, her face pale. "They're coming." Jake felt a cold sweat break out across his skin. He reached for his sidearm, knowing it would be of little use against the Chiron, but needing to hold something, anything, in his hands. How many are we talking about? Lyra shook her head, her voice barely audible over the storm. I don't know, but we need to hold them off until the frequency takes full effect. It will only be a few minutes, but... Jake nodded grimly. A few minutes can feel like a lifetime in a situation like this. The first Chiron emerged from the darkness like a nightmare come to life. It was massive, its form a shifting mass of dark, sinewy flesh that seemed to ripple and flow as it moved. Its eyes glowed with a sickly green light, and its body was covered in jagged, spiny protrusions that crackled with energy. The creature moved with a terrifying grace, its limbs long and powerful, as it advanced on the entrance to the chamber. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he took in the sheer size of the creature. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a being that defied the laws of nature, a product of the planet's strange energy. The Chiron let out a low, rumbling growl, its eyes locking onto Jake with an almost intelligent malice. "Get ready," Jake shouted over the storm, his voice laced with tension. The Chiron lunged, its movements impossibly fast for something of its size. Jake fired his sidearm, the energy bolts sizzling through the air and striking the creature's body. But the Chiron barely flinched, the bolts dissipating against its shifting flesh like raindrops against stone. The creature reached the entrance, slamming into the barricade with enough force to shake the entire structure. Jake stumbled back, his mind racing as he tried to think of a way to slow it down. Lyra was at his side, her expression focused and determined. "Keep it distracted," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the storm. "The frequency is almost there." Jake fired again, aiming for the creature's eyes, but the Chiron seemed to anticipate his moves, its body shifting and contorting to avoid the shots. It lashed out with one of its limbs, smashing through part of the barricade and sending debris flying. Jake ducked, narrowly avoiding a chunk of stone that would have taken his head off. "We can't keep this up," Jake yelled, panic creeping into his voice. Lyra's hands flew over the controls, her eyes fixed on the screen. Just a little longer. The Chiron roared, a sound that sent a jolt of terror through Jake's body. It slammed into the barricade again, this time breaking through the outer layer. Jake fired another volley, trying to push it back, but the creature was relentless, its eyes glowing brighter as it advanced. Then, just as Jake thought they were about to be overwhelmed, the hum of the counter-frequency changed pitch, becoming a piercing tone that resonated through the air. The Chiron froze, its body shuddering as the sound hit it. The creature let out a high-pitched screech, its form writhing as if in pain. Lyra's voice cut through the chaos. "Now, we need to push it back while the frequency is disrupting it." Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed a nearby metal rod, a piece of ancient debris, and charged at the Chiron. The creature was momentarily disoriented, its connection to the planet's energy field disrupted by the frequency. Jake swung the rod with all his strength, aiming for the creature's head. The impact sent a shockwave up Jake's arms, but the Chiron reeled back, its glowing eyes flickering. Lyra joined the fray, using a similar piece of debris to strike the creature's limbs, trying to force it out of the chamber. The Chiron screeched again, its body contorting in unnatural ways as it tried to resist the counter-frequency. But the disruption was too strong, and with one final, desperate lunge, the creature retreated, its form dissolving into the storm as it fled back into the darkness. Jake collapsed against the wall, panting heavily, his heart racing. The storm still raged outside, but the immediate threat had passed. Lyra was beside him, her chest heaving with exertion, but her eyes were bright with relief. "We did it," she said, her voice breathless. "The frequency worked." Jake nodded, struggling to catch his breath. "Yeah, but that was too close. We need to be better prepared next time." Lyra didn't argue. She knew as well as he did that they had been lucky this time. The Chiron were powerful, dangerous creatures, and they had only driven one away. There could be more out there waiting for another opportunity to strike. "We need to strengthen the defenses," Jake said after a moment, his mind already racing with ideas. "Reinforce the barricades, maybe set up some traps or alarms, and we should find a way to make the counter-frequency more effective in case they come back." Lyra nodded, her expression serious. "Agreed. But we also need to continue working on your ship. The sooner we can repair it, the sooner we can leave this planet and avoid these dangers altogether." Jake couldn't argue with that. The storm outside was a reminder of just how hostile this world could be, and the longer they stayed, the more they risked. But even as he thought about leaving, Jake felt a pang of something else, an attachment, perhaps, to this strange, ancient world and the mysteries it held. He looked at Lyra, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the consoles. She was an enigma, a living link to a civilization that had been lost to time. There was so much about her and her people that he still didn't understand, and a part of him wanted to learn more, to uncover the secrets of this world and its history. But survival had to come first. They couldn't afford to let their guard down, not with the Chiron still out there and the planet's energy field as volatile as ever. "We'll get through this," Jake said, more to himself than to Lyra. "One way or another we'll find a way." Lyra's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. "We will," she said quietly. "We have each other, and that is enough." Jake felt a warmth spread through him at her words, a sense of connection that went beyond their immediate situation. They were in this together, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a team. As the storm outside began to subside, Jake allowed himself to relax, if only for a moment. The danger had passed, and they had bought themselves some time. But he knew that the trials were far from over. The planet was full of secrets, and each one they uncovered brought new risks. But Jake was a survivor, and so was Lyra. Together they would navigate the treacherous landscape of this world, facing whatever dangers came their way. And maybe, just maybe, they would find a way to turn this hostile, forgotten world into something more, a place of hope, of new beginnings, and of survival against all odds. The days that followed their harrowing encounter with the Chiron were marked by an uneasy calm. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape even more desolate than before. The ruins, once imposing in their silent grandeur, now felt like the skeletal remains of a long-forgotten civilization, haunted by the echoes of its past. Jake and Lyra worked tirelessly, their focus split between repairing the Orion's light and fortifying their defenses. They reinforced the entrance to the chamber with salvaged materials, setting up makeshift traps and alarms to warn them of any approaching dangers. The storm had reminded them of the planet's unpredictability, and they weren't taking any chances. But even as they threw themselves into the work, a tension began to build between them, an unspoken tension that neither could fully articulate but both could feel. It was a tension born not just of the dangers they faced, but of the growing bond between them, a bond that was becoming more complicated with each passing day. Jake found himself increasingly aware of Lyra, not just as an ally or a fellow survivor, but as a woman, an extraordinary woman, different from anyone he had ever known. She was strong, intelligent, and resourceful, but there was also a vulnerability to her, a depth of feeling that drew him in. He had come to rely on her, not just for survival, but for companionship, for the comfort of knowing he wasn't alone on this desolate world. And yet, that very reliance was what troubled him. Jake knew that his ship was slowly but surely being repaired, that the day would come when he would have to leave this planet. The thought of leaving Lyra behind gnawed at him, a dilemma that he couldn't shake. He had a life back on Earth, a mission to complete, but the idea of abandoning Lyra, of never seeing her again, filled him with a deep, aching sorrow. Lyra, for her part, was just as conflicted. She had spent years alone, the last of her kind on a dying world, and Jake's arrival had brought with it a glimmer of hope, a hope she hadn't dared to feel in a long time. She admired Jake's determination, his courage, and his unwavering sense of duty, but she also knew that his presence on this planet was temporary. Sooner or later he would leave, and she would be alone again. But it wasn't just the fear of being left behind that troubled Lyra. She had come to care for Jake in a way that went beyond mere companionship. There was a connection between them, a shared understanding that transcended their differences. Lyra had never imagined that she could feel this way about someone so different, someone from a distant world, and yet here she was, caught in a web of emotions that she couldn't untangle. The unspoken tension between them reached its peak one evening as they sat together in the chamber, the soft glow of the consoles casting flickering shadows on the walls. They had just finished another long day of repairs and fortifications, and the exhaustion was beginning to wear on them both. The silence between them was heavy, filled with all the things they weren't saying. Jake finally broke the silence, his voice low and hesitant. "Lyra, we need to talk about what happens next." Lyra looked up from the console she had been adjusting, her eyes meeting his. There was a guardedness in her expression, as if she already knew what he was going to say, but didn't want to hear it. "Yes, we do," she replied quietly. Jake took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "The ship. It's nearly repaired. I've done as much as I can with the materials we have, and with a bit of luck, I should be able to get it operational again in a few days. I'll be able to leave." Lyra's expression didn't change, but Jake could see the tension in her body, the way her fingers tightened around the edge of the console. "And what will you do then?" she asked, her voice calm but tinged with an undercurrent of something else, something that Jake couldn't quite identify. "I'll have to leave," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have a duty to complete my mission, to get back to Earth and report what I've found." But he hesitated, the words catching in his throat. "But I don't want to leave you behind, Lyra. I can't imagine just going back to my life without you." Lyra's gaze softened and she looked away, as if trying to hide the emotion in her eyes. "I knew this day would come," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "From the moment you arrived, I knew that you would eventually leave. You have a life, a world waiting for you, and I am just a remnant of a forgotten past." Jake reached out, placing a hand on her arm. "You're not just a remnant, Lyra. You're so much more than that. You've survived against all odds, you've kept the knowledge of your people alive, and you've helped me in ways I can't even begin to describe. You're important not just to me, but to this world." Lyra turned back to him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "But what kind of future do I have, Jake? My people are gone, my world is dying, and I am alone. If I go with you to Earth, what would I be? An outsider, a relic from a civilization no one remembers." Jake's heart ached at her words. He knew she was right. Bringing her back to Earth would be fraught with challenges. She would be a stranger in a strange land, subject to the curiosity, fear, and prejudice of a world that might not understand her. But the alternative, leaving her behind, felt unbearable. "We could figure it out together," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "We could find a way to make it work. You wouldn't be alone, Lyra. I'd be with you, every step of the way." Lyra closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You say that now, Jake, but what about later? What happens when you go back to your life, your world? What happens when I become a burden, a reminder of a past you want to forget?" Jake's grip on her arm tightened, his desperation rising. "You could never be a burden to me, Lyra. I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone. I don't want to lose you." Lyra's eyes snapped open, and she met his gaze with an intensity that took his breath away. "And what if you do? What if you take me with you, and it doesn't work out? What if I'm forced to live in a world where I don't belong, where I'm always an outsider? Could you really ask that of me?" Jake's heart pounded in his chest, torn between the desire to be with her and the harsh reality of what that would mean. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I don't know what the future holds. But I know that I want to try. I want to be with you, Lyra. I don't care about the risks, about what might happen. All I care about is us, here and now." Lyra's expression softened, and for a moment she seemed to waver, caught between hope and despair. Then, slowly, she reached up and cupped his face in her hands, her touch warm and gentle. "Jake, you don't know how much that means to me," she said softly. "But I can't ask you to sacrifice your life, your world, for me. And I can't ask you to take me with you, only to watch you suffer because of it." Jake's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Lyra, please. I don't care about the sacrifices. I don't care about any of it. All I care about is you." Lyra's thumb brushed against his cheek, wiping away a tear that had escaped. "And I care about you, Jake. That's why I can't let you do this. You have a life, a future that you need to live. I can't take that away from you." Jake felt his heart shatter at her words, but he knew deep down that she was right. The future they faced was uncertain, and the risks were immense. But even as he acknowledged the truth, the thought of leaving her behind, of never seeing her again, was more than he could bear. "I don't want to lose you," Jake whispered, his voice trembling. Lyra leaned in, pressing her forehead against his. "You won't lose me, Jake. No matter what happens, you'll always have a part of me with you. And I'll always have a part of you." The connection between them was electric, a current of emotion that surged through Jake's body, leaving him breathless. He could feel her warmth, her strength, and the depth of her feelings for him. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered connection, one that transcended words, time, and even space. They stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, neither wanting to break the fragile bond that had formed between them, But eventually, the reality of their situation began to creep back in, the weight of the decision they faced pressing down on them both. "We have to make a choice," Lyra said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have to decide whether to stay or to go. And I have to decide whether to let you." Jake closed his eyes, his mind swirling with conflicting thoughts and emotions. The rational part of him knew that returning to Earth was the logical choice, that his duty and responsibilities lay there. But his heart, his very soul, yearned to stay with Lyra, to build a life with her on this strange, ancient world. But was that even possible? Could they truly create a life together here, surrounded by the remnants of a lost civilization, with the constant threat of the Chiron and the planet's unstable energy field? And if they did stay, what kind of life would it be? Would they be able to find peace, happiness, and a sense of belonging? Or would they simply be prolonging the inevitable living in the shadow of a world that was slowly dying? Lyra seemed to sense his inner turmoil, and she gently pulled back, giving him space to think. "Jake," she said softly, "whatever you decide, know that I will support you. Whether you choose to stay or go, I will understand. But you need to make this choice for yourself, for your own future." Jake took a deep, shaky breath, his mind racing. The thought of leaving her, of returning to Earth without her, felt like an impossible burden. But the thought of staying, of trying to build a life here with all the uncertainties and dangers that entailed, was equally daunting. And then, as if a veil had been lifted from his mind, the answer came to him not as a clear, definitive solution, but as a realization of what truly mattered to him. It wasn't about choosing between Earth and this planet, between his duty and his heart. It was about choosing the path that would allow him to live with no regrets, to embrace the unknown and to cherish the connection he had found with Lyra. Jake opened his eyes, meeting Lyra's gaze with a newfound clarity. "I want to stay," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "I want to stay with you, Lyra. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want to face it with you. We'll figure it out together no matter what." Lyra's eyes widened in surprise, her breath catching in her throat. "Jake, are you sure? This world is dangerous, and the life we'd have here would be nothing like what you're used to." Jake smiled, a warmth spreading through him as he looked at her. "I'm sure. I've spent my whole life exploring the unknown, taking risks and facing challenges, but I've never had something or someone that made all of that feel worthwhile. Until now." Lyra's expression softened, and she took his hand in hers, squeezing it gently. "If you're sure, then I will stay with you, Jake. We will build a life here together. But it won't be easy." Jake nodded, his heart swelling with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "I know it won't be easy. But we'll make it work. We'll use what we've learned, what we've found in these ruins, and we'll create something new. A home, a sanctuary, whatever it takes." Lyra's eyes shone with emotion, and she leaned in, pressing her lips to his in a soft, lingering kiss. It was a kiss that spoke of promises, of hope, and of a future that they would face together, no matter what challenges lay ahead. When they finally pulled apart, Lyra rested her forehead against his, her voice filled with quiet determination. "Then let's do it, Jake. Let's build a new life here, among the ruins of the past. We will make this world our own." Jake's heart soared at her words, and he felt a renewed sense of purpose, of possibility. The decision had been made, and now there was no turning back. They would stay on this planet, embracing the unknown, and creating a future that was theirs and theirs alone. But even as they made plans, as they spoke of the steps they would take to secure their new home, there was a part of Jake that couldn't ignore the reality of their situation. The planet was still unstable, the energy field volatile, and the Chiron a constant threat. They would need to remain vigilant, to continue learning about the world they had chosen to inhabit. But for now, in this moment, they were together, and that was enough. It was a fragile peace, a brief respite in the midst of uncertainty, but it was theirs. As the night deepened and they settled into their makeshift shelter, Jake found himself lying awake, staring up at the dark ceiling of the chamber. The weight of their decision hung heavy in the air, but there was also a sense of hope, of new beginnings. He reached out, finding Lyra's hand in the darkness, and held it tightly, drawing comfort from her presence. They had chosen to stay, to build a life on this ancient, forgotten world. It was a decision born of love, of necessity, and of the desire to forge a new path together. And as Jake drifted off to sleep, his thoughts filled with dreams of the future, He knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side, united by the bond they had forged in the ruins of the past. The journey was far from over, but they had taken the first step, a step that would lead them into the unknown, with the promise of a new beginning and a love that could withstand even the harshest of worlds. The decision to stay on the planet marked the beginning of a new chapter in Jake and Lyra's lives, a chapter filled with both hope and uncertainty. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity as they set about the daunting task of creating a life among the ruins of a forgotten civilization. Every moment was consumed with work, planning, and the constant vigilance required to survive in such a hostile environment. But despite the challenges, there was a sense of purpose that fueled their efforts and determination to make this world their own. The first priority was securing their new home. The chamber where they had taken refuge was fortified with additional layers of protection. Jake and Lyra scavenged the ruins for materials, repurposing ancient technology and debris to build barriers and traps designed to keep the Chiron and other potential threats at bay. The work was grueling, but it was necessary, and with each day that passed, their defenses grew stronger. But even as they focused on the practicalities of survival, there was a deeper transformation taking place, a gradual blending of their two worlds, a merging of cultures and knowledge that would form the foundation of their new life together. Jake had always been a hands-on engineer, someone who understood machines and systems through touch and intuition. Lyra, on the other hand, possessed a deep understanding of the planet's energy fields, the ancient technology of her people, and the delicate balance between the natural world and the forces that shaped it. Together, they found a way to combine their skills, creating something new, something that neither of them could have achieved alone. One of their first joint projects was to stabilize the energy field that had caused so much turmoil on the planet. Lyra's knowledge of the Alara technology was invaluable in this endeavor, and with Jake's engineering expertise, they began the painstaking process of repairing the ancient systems that controlled the flow of energy across the planet. The work was delicate, requiring a precise understanding of the ancient codes and mechanisms that governed the energy field. Lyra guided Jake through the process, teaching him how to interpret the symbols and controls that had been passed down through generations of her people. Jake, in turn, found ways to adapt the Alara technology, using his understanding of modern engineering to make the systems more stable and efficient. It was a labor of love, a project that consumed their days and nights. The energy field was the planet's lifeblood, and stabilizing it was key, not only to their survival but to the possibility of restoring balance to the world. As they worked, they began to uncover more about the planet's history, how the Alara had once thrived, how they had harnessed the energy to build their civilization, and how their hubris had ultimately led to their downfall. The more they learned, the more Jake and Lyra realized that their decision to stay was not just about survival. It was about honoring the past, learning from the mistakes of those who had come before, and forging a new path forward. They weren't just building a life for themselves, they were rebuilding a world, one piece at a time. As the weeks turned into months, the fruits of their labor began to take shape. The energy field, once chaotic and unstable, was gradually brought under control. The storms that had once ravaged the landscape became less frequent and less severe, the weather pattern stabilizing as the planet itself seemed to respond to their efforts. The ruins, once crumbling and abandoned, began to take on a new life as Jake and Lyra repaired and repurposed the ancient structures. Their home became a sanctuary, a place where the old and the new coexisted in harmony. The central chamber where they had first taken refuge was transformed into a living space, filled with light and warmth. The consoles that had once controlled the energy field now served as a hub for their work, while the surrounding rooms were converted into storage areas, workshops, and a small garden where they cultivated the hardy, resilient plants that grew on the planet. It was a life unlike anything Jake had ever imagined, and yet it felt right, like this was where he was meant to be. The connection he felt with Lyra deepened with each passing day, their bond growing stronger as they faced the challenges of their new life together. There were moments of doubt, of fear, but they were always tempered by the knowledge that they had each other, that they were no longer alone. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of work, Jake and Lyra sat together in the garden, watching as the twin moons rose over the horizon, casting a soft, silvery light over the landscape. The air was cool, and still, the only sound the gentle rustle of the wind through the leaves. Jake leaned back against the smooth stone wall, his eyes fixed on the stars above. "You know," he said after a long silence, "if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be living on a deserted planet with an alien woman, I would have thought they were crazy." Lyra smiled, her gaze also turned skyward. And if someone had told me that I would find companionship with a human from a distant world, I would have found it hard to believe as well. Jake chuckled softly, turning to look at her. But here we are. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the light of the moons. Yes, here we are, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Jake's heart swelled at her words. He reached out, taking her hand in his, and squeezed it gently. Neither would I. They sat in companionable silence for a while, enjoying the peace of the moment. The garden had become one of their favorite places, a symbol of the life they were building together. It was a place where they could reflect on the past, dream of the future, and simply be present with each other. But even in this moment of tranquility, there was an undercurrent of unspoken questions about the future, about what lay ahead for them and for the world they were trying to restore. Lyra seemed to sense Jake's thoughts, and she turned to him, her expression thoughtful. Jake, do you ever wonder what will happen to us, to this planet? Jake sighed, his brow furrowing as he considered her question. I think about it all the time, he admitted. We've come so far and we've done so much, but there's still so much we don't know. The energy field, the Chiron, the planet itself. It's all still a mystery in a lot of ways. Lyra nodded, her eyes darkening with a hint of worry. The Chiron. They are still out there, we've managed to keep them at bay, but they are ancient, powerful beings. I fear that our efforts to stabilize the energy field may have only delayed the inevitable. They are drawn to the energy, and as long as it exists, they will be a threat. Jake squeezed her hand again, offering what comfort he could. We'll figure it out, Lyra. We've already done so much more than either of us thought possible. And whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Lyra gave him a small, grateful smile, but her eyes remained distant, as if she were seeing something far beyond the garden, beyond the ruins. I hope you're right, Jake. This planet, it holds so many secrets, so many dangers, but it also holds the key to something greater. I can feel it. Jake frowned, intrigued by her words. What do you mean? Lyra hesitated, as if struggling to put her thoughts into words. There is something about this planet, something about the energy field, the Chiron, and the ruins of my people. They are all connected, but I don't fully understand how. It's as if the planet itself is alive, as if it has a consciousness that we have only begun to touch. Jake considered this, his mind racing. The idea of a planet with a consciousness was not entirely foreign. There were theories and legends about such places in human history. But to think that he might be living on one, that he and Lyra might be part of something far larger than themselves, was both thrilling and terrifying. Do you think we could communicate with it? Jake asked, his voice filled with wonder. If the planet is alive, if it has some kind of consciousness, maybe we could find a way to connect with it, to understand what it wants, what it needs. Lyra's eyes brightened at the idea, and she nodded slowly. It's possible. My people were always searching for ways to connect with the natural world, to understand the forces that shaped it. But we were too focused on controlling those forces, rather than listening to them. Perhaps that was our greatest mistake. Jake felt a surge of excitement, a sense of purpose. Then maybe that's what we need to do, find a way to communicate with the planet, to understand its needs, its desires. If we can do that, maybe we can find a way to coexist, to bring balance back to this world. Lyra smiled, her expression filled with a renewed sense of hope. Yes, Jake, I believe that is our next step, but it will not be easy. It will require patience, understanding, and a willingness to let go of our preconceptions. Jake nodded, determination settling over him like a second skin. I'm ready for it. Whatever it takes, we'll find a way. They spent the next few days discussing and planning how to go about their new goal. Lyra shared more of the knowledge passed down by her people, ancient rituals and methods they had once used to commune with the forces of nature. Jake contributed his understanding of energy fields, frequencies, and the principles of communication. Together, they devised a plan to attempt contact with the planet's consciousness, if it indeed had one. Their first attempt was tentative, a cautious exploration of the possibilities. Using a combination of Alara technology and Jake's adapted systems, they created a device designed to send and receive signals at a frequency attuned to the planet's energy field. The device was set up in the central chamber, the heart of their operations, where the energy field was most stable. The day they activated the device, The air was charged with anticipation. The chamber was filled with a low hum as the device powered up, the consoles flickering with streams of data as it began to transmit. Jake and Lyra stood side by side, their eyes fixed on the screens, waiting to see if their efforts would yield any results. For a long time, nothing happened. The device continued to hum, sending out its signal, but there was no response, no indication that the planet was aware of their presence. The tension in the chamber grew, the silence heavy with unspoken fears. But just as they were beginning to lose hope, something changed. The hum of the device shifted, the frequency modulating in response to an external force. The screens flickered, the data streams altering, as the device began to pick up a faint signal and echo, a whisper, something that defied explanation. Jake's heart leaped in his chest. "Lyra, look at this." Lyra leaned in, her eyes wide with amazement. "It's responding. The planet is responding." The signal grew stronger, the data on the screens becoming more coherent, more structured. It was as if the planet itself was reaching out to them, acknowledging their presence, their efforts. The sensation was overwhelming, a rush of emotion and energy that surged through Jake and Lyra like a tidal wave. And then, for the briefest of moments, Jake felt something in awareness, a consciousness, brushing against his own. It was ancient, vast, and incomprehensible, a presence that was both awe-inspiring and humbling. It wasn't a voice, not in the way that humans understood voices, but a feeling, a connection that transcended language and thought. Lyra's hand tightened around his, and Jake knew she felt it too, the presence of the planet, the consciousness that had been lying dormant, waiting for someone to reach out. It was a moment of profound connection, a glimpse into something far greater than themselves. But as quickly as it came, the sensation faded, the signal weakening, until it disappeared entirely. The screens returned to their normal state, the hum of the device settling into a steady rhythm once more. Jake and Lyra stood in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. They had made contact, however brief, with the consciousness of the planet. They had touched something ancient, something that defied understanding. Lyra was the first to speak, her voice filled with awe. "We did it, Jake. We reached it." Jake nodded, still trying to process the experience. "But what does it mean? What do we do now?" Lyra's eyes were filled with determination. "We continue. We've made contact, but that's only the beginning. We need to learn from it, understand what it wants, what it needs. This planet is alive, Jake, and it has a will of its own. If we can understand it, we can bring balance back to this world." Jake felt a surge of excitement, a renewed sense of purpose. "You're right. This is just the beginning. We've unlocked something incredible here, and we need to see it through." In the days that followed, Jake and Lyra continued their efforts to communicate with the planet. They refined the device, adjusting the frequencies and signals to better align with the energy field. Each time they activated it, the connection grew stronger, the signals clearer. They began to pick up more than just echoes, patterns, rhythms, and responses that hinted at a complex, intelligent consciousness. Through these interactions, they learned more about the planet's history, its cycles, and the events that had led to the downfall of the Alara civilization. They discovered that the planet had once been in harmony with its inhabitants, but the Alara's attempts to control and manipulate the energy field had disrupted that balance, leading to the catastrophic events that had followed. The Chiron, they learned, were not merely predators, but guardians of the planet's energy, beings that had been created by the planet itself to protect its core. When the Alara had attempted to harness the energy for their own purposes, the Chiron had reacted violently, seeking to restore the natural order. The instability in the energy field had only exacerbated their aggression, making them a constant threat to anyone who remained on the planet. But now, with the energy field stabilized and Jake and Lyra's efforts to communicate with the planet, there was a chance to bring about a new balance. The Chiron could be pacified, the planet's cycles restored, and a new era of coexistence could begin. It was an ambitious goal, one that would take time, patience, and a deep understanding of the planet's needs. But Jake and Lyra were committed to the task. They had chosen to stay, to build a life on this world, and now they had a purpose that went beyond their own survival. As the weeks turned into months, their efforts began to bear fruit. The planet's environment continued to stabilize, the storms becoming less frequent, the landscape beginning to recover. The garden they had cultivated flourished, and they began to expand their efforts, planting more crops, creating a sustainable ecosystem that could support them in the long term. The Chiron, once their greatest threat, became less aggressive as the energy field settled into a stable pattern. They still roamed the planet, but their attacks became less frequent, their presence more a part of the natural order than a constant danger. Jake and Lyra's bond deepened, their connection growing stronger with each passing day. They were no longer just survivors, but partners, builders of a new world. They shared their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, watching the twin moons rise over the horizon, Jake turned to Lyra, his heart full of love and gratitude. "Lyra," he said softly, taking her hand in his, "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. We were meant to find each other, meant to build this life together. I know we have a long road ahead, but I want you to know that I'm committed to us, to this world, to everything we're building here." Lyra's eyes shimmered with emotion, and she squeezed his hand tightly. "I feel the same way, Jake. We've been through so much, and I can't imagine my life without you. This world, it's our home now, and I'm ready to face whatever the future holds, as long as we're together." Jake leaned in, pressing his lips to hers in a tender, heartfelt kiss. It was a kiss that spoke of promises, of hope, and of a future that they would build together, no matter what challenges lay ahead. As they pulled apart, Jake looked out over the garden, his heart swelling with pride at what they had accomplished. The ruins that had once been a symbol of loss and despair were now a place of new beginnings, a testament to their resilience and determination. They had chosen to stay, to build a life on this ancient, forgotten world. And in doing so, they had found something far greater than they could have ever imagined: a connection to a living, breathing planet, a bond that transcended time and space, and a love that could withstand even the harshest of worlds. The journey was far from over, but Jake and Lyra were ready. They had each other, they had their home, and they had the knowledge and strength to face whatever the future held. As the night deepened and the stars filled the sky, Jake and Lyra sat together in the garden, their hands intertwined, their hearts full. They were no longer just survivors, they were pioneers, builders of a new world, a world where the past and the future coexisted in harmony. And as they looked out over the landscape, the ruins bathed in the soft light of the moons, they knew that they had found something truly extraordinary: a new beginning, a life filled with love, purpose, and the promise of endless possibilities.